So in part 2, chapter 1 of the Katha Upanishad, so I'll read the verses we covered already. So the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with the inherent defect that they are by nature outgoing. This is why beings see things outside and cannot see the self within. Rarely is there found a wise person seeking immortality who can withdraw his sense organs from external objects and see the self within. Immature people run after external objects and they invariably get caught in the widespread net of death. Wise people, however, know where true immortality is. That is why they reject everything in this world, knowing that these things are short-lived. It is by this self that a person knows form, taste, smell, sound, touch, and sex pleasure. What else remains that the self does not know? In other words, because the self is all-knowing. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. Whatever experiences a person has, whether in the sleeping state or in the waking state, are possible because of that great, all-pervasive self. An enlightened soul realizes his oneness with that great self and is no longer subject to grief. The person who knows the individual self, in spite of his enjoying the fruits of its actions, to be the Lord of the past, present, and future, and who finds himself close to him, in other words, realizes his unity with him, has no reason to be afraid of anything. This truly is that self Nachiketa was asking about. So then we come to verse 6. That he, the spiritual seeker, who is able to see distinctly that being who preceded the elements, who is the firstborn from consciousness, who is in the heart of every being, in its bodies and organs, all products of the elements, he truly sees that Brahman. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. And the commentary says that the world is nothing but a manifestation of Brahman, pure consciousness. The first manifestation is here on the garden, and it is the sum total of all beings. It became manifest even before the elements. It is the self of every being, and is in every part of the being, in his body as well as in its organs. To be able to see the same self everywhere is the goal of life. This self is what Nachiketa was asking about. So as you remember how Katha Upanishad started out with the story of Nachiketa, how he went to the abode of Yama, the god of death, and then god of death, Yama, he was out somewhere, and so Nachiketa stayed by his door, outside without food or anything for 3 days. And so when Yama, the god of death, came back, he was very upset, and because not taking care of a guest, not showing hospitality to a guest is considered a great sin. So he was very apologetic, and he said, because you've had to sit here for 3 days without food, I give you 3 wounds. And you read the first wound was that Nachiketa's father, who had sent him to Yama in anger, that he would be pacified, that he would be calm in mind, and that he would recognize Nachiketa when he came back from the abode of death. The second boon that Nachiketa asked for was to know the particular fire sacrifice, which when performed would take a person to heaven. And so Yama showed him how to do this particular worship, and he afterwards said that Yama that Nachiketa is such a good student that from now on he would be called the Nachiketa sacrifice. So then, but for the third boon, then Nachiketa asked Yama. He said that some people say we continue to exist after death, and some say we don't. And I want to know the truth about this. In other words, I want to know the ultimate truth about who I am, and what I am, what we are. And so this is the self that Nachiketa was asking about. And this is what Yama is now telling him. He's describing in the various verses, okay, this is the nature of that self, and this is the self that you were talking about, that you were seeking to know about. And so in this verse 6, it said that he who was able to see distinctly, that being who preceded the elements, who is the firstborn from consciousness, who is in the heart of every being, in its body and organs, all products of the elements, he truly sees that ground. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. Now, in truth, according to Vedanta, there's only one thing that exists, and that's Brahman. And he said Brahman is impersonal. It's not a particular form or anything, and it's indescribable. But traditionally, the closest they can come to describing it is Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss. Now, everything that we experience, it shows aspects. Things exist, but they exist for a time and then they go away. It's called relative existence. And we also experience a little bit of joy, but then that joy can go away, and now we experience unhappiness. Right there, we get just a little tiny glimpse of what the nature of Brahman is. But we also experience consciousness. And this we were talking about in the early classes, how we experience consciousness, but what we experience is human consciousness. And what human consciousness is actually consciousness connected with, identified with a particular body, a particular mind, a particular personality, in a particular sense of individuality. I'm this particular person here. Now that is not the consciousness they're talking about. The thing within us, which is aware, which is conscious, which gives us our sense of being alive and aware, that consciousness is actually the consciousness, actually Brahman's consciousness. And that consciousness, as Brahman's consciousness in its own state, is the consciousness of everything. Everything has come out of that consciousness. Essentially, even in modern science, when they're trying to determine what's the ultimate cause of things. They can say from the Big Bang, they can say every millisecond after this, this happened, and galaxies came, and this. They can kind of show the whole process, but nobody knows what caused the Big Bang, what was there before the Big Bang. But some of the scientists in modern times have begun to think in terms of the ultimate source of things, maybe consciousness. And this is what Vedanta has said since 10,000 BC or something. It's been saying that. Now, in order to understand this, we have to have a different concept of creation than most people generally have. We usually think of creation as, okay, God created the universe and He stuck it out there, and then He sits in heaven and He runs it. And He's at a big desk and He manages everything. But in fact, that's our experience. At the human level, the material level, this is our experience of creation. A person creates something and then it's a separate object, something different. But the example we use before is the creation of a novelist, a writer, that he creates a whole world full of people, full of activities, full of events, everything, drama, everything going on. But all of that creation is contained within his own mind and consciousness. It's not something separate. And if the characters in his book
begin to look at all the different people, all the different objects and things in that world, and ask, who made me? They wouldn't find anybody. They wouldn't find anything there, any object there that was their creator. But yet all the time, the creator is present right where they're at because they're in the mind of the creator. They're within the creator. And the creator's consciousness is what keeps everything alive. If the novelist, he forgot about his book and dropped it, then that whole world would disappear. And so, like that, this whole universe, all the beings in it, are a product of consciousness. Now, Brahman, in his real state, he's not involved with the universe at all. He's just Brahman. But when you think in terms of the universe, then he's called Hiranyagarbha. Hiranyagarbha is like the cosmic mind. It's this mind of the creator. The novelist that holds everything within it, and that's picturing everything, all the activities, all the beings, everything going on. This is being formed by that Hiranyagarbha, by that cosmic mind. And we represent like one little tiny idea, one little character in that book. And as long as we think of ourselves as I'm this particular character here, I'm this particular person here, we live in a very small state of consciousness. We experience what happens to us, and that's it. Through education, we can expand our consciousness. We can become, our mind can become full of other countries, history, science, all these things. It can become as vast, practically, as the universe. But ultimately, as long as we have a sense of individual identity, of being a distinct, particular consciousness, then the consciousness we know, the awareness we know, is limited. Limited to what I experience, what I know, what I feel, and so forth. But when you get back deep within and begin to ask, well, who am I really? What is the source of my real nature? Then you're getting back into what they call self with a capital S, our consciousness, which is just consciousness. Not consciousness connected with the body or consciousness connected with the personality. It's just the consciousness, and that consciousness is the consciousness of everything. It is the consciousness of every being in this universe. And this is what the Vedantic knowledge is, what the self is, what the truth is that Yama is trying to give to Nachiketa, is that that's your real nature. You asked about, well, what is the real nature of man? This is what the real nature is. As long as you think in terms, individual terms, of my life and my success and my failure and my happiness, my unhappiness, as long as you're thinking in individual terms, then you're living in a very kind of small state of consciousness. But when you get back to the truth, to the reality of what you are, then you discover that consciousness which is within you, giving your sense of I'm me, I exist, this is me, that consciousness, that same consciousness is in everybody else too. And your consciousness then becomes as vast as the universe. And this is the idea behind this statement, is to be able to see the same self everywhere is the goal of life. This self is what Nachiketa was asking about. So see, it's really kind of a wonderful thing. We're all kind of playing a drama. We're all in this drama, and some of us are good people, some of us bad people, and so on. But when you go a little deeper, and you realize, oh, there's just one self here that's in the drama. And this very person that I don't particularly like personally, you realize, oh, it's that same God, that same divine being playing the role of a villain. And like that, you realize that what we perceive as individuals, as human beings, isn't the reality of things. There's a whole other dimensions of that reality that will begin to open up. And when the true knowledge is there, then there's no distinction between this particular self, made up of this particular body and mind and soul, and any other self. Because you realize the self, it's the consciousness in every single being, and you become one with that consciousness. Now, as a person, as an individual, we may be a good person, or we may be a bad person. We may be an extremely good person, very loving, very wonderful, very, very nice and unselfish, but we're still just a small individual expressing a little bit of goodness. And what we can do for other people becomes limited. We can start a charity, do some charitable work, some good work, and like that, some little bit of good we can do. But when what functions within us is not my personal self, with my amount of education, my amount of intelligence, my amount of ability, it's not my personal self functioning. It's the self, the universal will, the creator of the universe. It's now functioning, flowing through me. Then you become kind of transformed. And this is what ultimately we're all moving towards that. We're all, as Swami Vivekananda said at the end of his commentary on the last verse of Raja Yoga, he said that after the yogi has completed this process, after he's gone through the whole thing and achieved success, so he just said that now nursemaid nature's job is done. She's taking the self-forgetting soul by the hand and led it through higher and higher experiences until its own divinity, lost divinity, came back to it. And then her job is done. Now the person has realized what we've been seeking. We think we're seeking happiness, other people are seeking money, other people are seeking power. But what we're actually seeking is to get back reunited with God, to become one again with that wonderful universal love. Because this is, like they talk about Satchidananda Brahma, that existence, consciousness, bliss. But Swami Varadananda, our Swami, one very senior Swami who was in Boston, he used to always say, she said, existence, consciousness, and love. Because that's what you discover there. In this world, we may feel very unloved. Nobody seems to like us, and very seldom do we have the deep sense of love, of being loved. We have some friendliness, a little bit of love we experience, but very seldom do we have a deep sense of being truly loved. But when you come in contact with the kind of creative power behind this Divine Mother, then you realize you're totally and completely loved. And this is what gradually unfolds from the soul. Right now, we're living the life of the prodigal son who left his father's home, who went off to build his own kingdom, and eventually then ended up in ruins, and had to go back to his father's home and say, well, we've separated ourselves from God, we've left our home in God, and then we go out to the world. And we think, oh, I'm going to do great things here. But then we find, usually, we end up doing a lot less than we had thought we were going to do, in the beginning, and kind of, and then we eventually leave the body, we go back into the kind of in-between state, heaven, whatever, and then you come back again and try again. But like that, we're separating ourselves from God, from our oneness with God. We're coming into this world, trying to create our own world, our own particular kingdom. And like the prodigal son, he did great at first. You remember he begged his father for his inheritance, and the father gave him the money. And for a while, he did great. But gradually, all his money was going away, and eventually he ended up with nothing. And like that, as we go through life, we're getting older and older and older. The body's wearing out, getting exhausted, and like that, slowly we're kind of dwindling away because we cut ourselves off from our connection with the divine. As soon as that connection is renewed, as soon as we begin to bring the presence of God back into our experience, then we see our consciousness starts to get transformed until eventually we reach this point of realizing that rather than being a separate person, rather than being needing to be a separate person, trying to struggle through this world, I'm going to be one with the whole universe. And that's my real state. And this is what we as individual souls, as jivas, we're all kind of evolving towards that, trying to reach that as a goal. So the self of all deities, a deity, manifests herself as the cosmic energy. She is the soul leader, and she is also the five elements. She is present in the heart of every being. If a spiritual seeker identifies himself with her, he realizes Brahman. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. So here, the suggestion is that a spiritual seeker should be able to see Brahman in the cosmic energy of Brahman. This energy is in all deities, and not only in deities, it is also in all beings. This energy is a deity, literally the eater, because it eats up or consumes everything. It is the destroyer. But the elements, matter, are not separate from energy. They are always together. They work upon each other, and then things happen in this world. This energy is in the heart of every being and everything, and it is also known as Hiranyagarbha, or the cosmic being. If a spiritual aspirant can identify himself with Hiranyagarbha, then he has reached his goal. This Hiranyagarbha manifests his energy is no other than Brahman. So Brahman, as Sri Ramakrishna taught, the Brahman has two aspects. You have the static aspect of just Brahman in his own essential nature, and you have the kind of active aspect of Brahman as the creator. Now, when we think of God, we normally think of God as the creator of the universe, but that's just something God does. It's like we say a particular person is a teacher. That's true, that's what he teaches, but then he goes home at night and he's not a teacher at all, he's just sitting at home being himself. So Brahman is God when he's sitting at home just being himself, just being Brahman. When you speak of creation, and then you have a creator, and this is the same Brahman, but now active as a creator. And Sri Ramakrishna, we say that Brahman and Shakti, in other words, Brahman and the creative power, they are like fire in this column to burn, or like milk. They already said it's like a snake. The snake coiled up is the same as a snake in motion. So they're not two different things, but they appear differently. So within this universe, it is all the play of the divine. And in that aspect is Hiranyagarbha. When you come to Brahman, then you're out of the universe altogether. You're not in creation at all. You're in the pure, essential nature of Brahman, right? Which is something much vaster, even than the entire universe. So that presence, that power, that Brahman, the energy, creative force of Brahman, they call Shakti or Prana, that energy, that life force is in all beings. He mentions here it's the self of all deities, but it's not only that. It's the self in all beings. Now normally when a person thinks of God and thinks of worshiping God, particularly in Hinduism, you have a whole variety of different deities you can worship. You have Shiva, Vishnu, Durga, all kinds of different deities that a person can worship. And we tend to think of worship in terms of you go to a temple and you make offerings to a particular deity. You pray or you do worship, make some offerings, but you give worship to what's usually either a morti, a statue, or other pictures. But you go to a particular place and say, okay, now I'm worshiping God. But for a realized soul, for somebody who actually knows the reality, like Swami Vivekananda, he says God is not limited to a temple, and he's not limited even to the different gods and goddesses. These gods and goddesses are like great cosmic powers, great powers in the universe. The presence of God is within them in a much greater way, to a much greater extent than it is in ordinary people. But essentially, they're no different than we're no different than them, because it's the same God manifesting in all forms. So Swami Vivekananda, he took the worship out of the temple, kind of saying, instead of just worshiping a particular statue where you offer some flowers or fruit or something, you realize that every being in the world is a manifestation of that same God, an expression of that same God, and within each person is the presence of the same God. And so a truly spiritual person truly realizes that everywhere I look, everybody I see, everything I see, this same God is there. And then the distinctions between high and low and so on gradually disappear. Now in the beginning, we normally need some kind of crutch, some kind of help. And so having a particular form of God that we're to roll into, doing worship, I think all these things are very helpful. But it eventually grows into a recognition that there's nothing that's not God. And this is the kind of ultimate consciousness that you eventually try to many people, there are many people in the world who are very quite religious. You know, they go to church regularly and everything, but then they're kind of uncaring about their other people in the world. Now Swami Vivekananda, when he founded the Ramakrishna mission, he founded it on the model for our own salvation and the welfare of all beings. For our own salvation, you have to go within, you have to try to uncover that presence of the divine within you, but at the same time, you live your life for the welfare of all beings. And another place he said that he defined God as pure unselfishness. And he said that selfishness is contraction, which is death. Unselfishness is expansion, which is life. When a person is selfish, it means more and more we're centered on this particular body, this particular mind. Our consciousness is becoming smaller, smaller, smaller. So that we only think in terms of this one person here. Now, unselfishness, on the other hand, means your consciousness begins to grow, begins to become aware of other people. At least for most people, it's families or friends, things like that. But you begin to realize not only me, but also you take other people into account. And like that, as you grow in consciousness, your consciousness is expanding, and it's getting back to that universal consciousness, which is its true nature. And normally we learn this through our human relationships, family, friends, and so forth. But in time, a person begins to outgrow even that. For the spiritual person, to realize there's no difference between his family and anybody else, because it's all one self. He's seeing the one Lord everywhere. And then whether that Lord is beautiful or ugly or smart or ignorant, it doesn't matter. Now this is what Swami Varadananda said, that when a person goes deep kind of meditation, when he gets beyond the body and the mind, he discovers that it's pure spiritual consciousness. And he said he finds that this spiritual consciousness, this point of consciousness which he is connected, is part of a much vaster consciousness. But he said that when you come out of that experience, that samadhi, that inner experience, you come out of that to the awareness of the outside world again, you realize that the consciousness which you experience, the spirit which you experience, that same spirit, that same consciousness is within everybody else. And then he said, in another place, that just as in human love, when we love someone, like the mother loves her child, or we love a particular person, that when we really kind of love a person, that even their faults, appear very adorable in our eyes. In the same way, he said that when you realize that within each person is God, who's the most loving, the most lovable, the most adorable thing in the universe, the embodiment of love, when you realize that that wonderful being is there within each person, then you begin to look on the world in a completely different way, and begin to See things not in terms of your personal opinions. I like this person, I don't like this person. But see, oh, here's the Lord in this form, here's the Lord in this form, and then your whole experience becomes transformed. And then everything becomes sacred, everything becomes worship. And you're living in that consciousness keeps you in conscious bliss and conscious kind of happiness. But it all goes back to this fundamental truth that it's the one self. There's only one self, one consciousness, and that consciousness is in everything, is everywhere. But you can't fully appreciate it or understand it until you uncover it within yourself. As soon as you know that you're spirit, then you realize, oh, spirit is there. Spirit is there within everybody. But, there's the idea, Swami Varadananda, he used to always urge his monks. He started the tradition of monks doing work, monks doing the service, and not just, living in a shrine, And one thing he used to always tell is, smear God over everything. And instead of seeing human beings, instead of seeing good and bad and everything, just smear God over everything. But to fully do that, and to appreciate it, and as Swami Varadananda said, he said, first of all, you have to find God within yourself. You have to know, well, what do you mean by God? What do you mean by spirit? And all this. When you experience it within yourself, and then in truth, you see it outside, in your everyday life. But even the practice of reminding yourself that I seem to be in this world, I seem to be dealing with people, and some are difficult, some aren't. If you kind of change that point of view from I like this thing, I don't like this thing, to just always remember that, what I'm seeing is actually just God Himself. Then you're transforming the whole quality of your life, the whole experience of your life, and you find after some time that you're not unhappy anymore. You're not having problems anymore. You're not stressed anymore. It's just everything is fine. Everything because gradually becomes okay because you're seeing everything in a different way. Normally, we're seeing this universe. We're seeing life in terms of what is it doing for me. Am I succeeding? Am I failing? Do people like me? Don't they like me? All these things we tend to be worried about. It's always in terms of, well, how am I doing in the world? And you have this whole vast universe full of galaxies and billions of stars and everything, but all of our attention is, well, how am I doing? Do people like me? Don't they like me? Do I like them? Do they like this? Our whole consciousness is filled with that. But when you begin to think in these other terms, then gradually you're beginning to expand your consciousness, become in tune, become in harmony with the kind of universal consciousness. So like a pregnant woman taking good care of the child in her womb, those who are alert about their religious duties and who are also well provided with butter, oil, and other materials take care of the sacrificial fire nestling between the two fire sticks used in lighting the fire. They worship the fire every day. This fire is the all-knowing Virat drum. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. So in ancient India, householders maintained the sacrificial fire in their home and kept it always ablaze by offering oblations. They took great care of the fire, as a mother takes care of a child in her womb. The fire was lit by rubbing two dry wooden sticks together. When the fire appeared, they placed one stick upon another and tended it carefully. This fire to them was symbolic of Virat. Yogins, however, worship this Virat in their hearts. The internal fire to them is Virat, and they meditate on that. This Virat, or the cosmic person, is what Nachiketa was asking about. So again, this was back in ancient India, very ancient India. In many households, they would have this, they're all kind of sacrificial fire, and they would keep it going. Like in some places we have the eternal flame. I think certain places where they try to keep it going all the time. And so like that, the household fire, I think once it was lit, it was supposed to remain constantly lit. And kind of tended. Now, in the same way for a yogi, though, he tries to light that fire within his heart, and the noise, and keep it lit, keep the attention there. So again, this was a symbol of Virat. Hiranyagarbha is a cosmic mind. Virat is like the cosmic body. You can say it's the whole physical universe. Hiranyagarbha is like a more subtle kind of mental thing, which is the source of the universe, because Virat is the universe taken as a whole. So that from where the sun rises and where it sets, all gods are dependent on that. In other words, Brahman. No one can be independent of that. This truly is that, the self, that Nachiketa was asking about. So the idea of this verse is that everything in the phenomenal world is dependent on Brahman. Here, Brahman is not the unmanifest Brahman. The Upanishad is referring to the first manifestation of Brahman, known as Hiranyagarbha, Prana, or Virat. It says that everything in this world arises from Brahman, rests on Brahman, and finally dissolves into Brahman. The sun is given as an example. The sun also by its powers, but even the sun is dependent on Brahman. Everything, however big or small, is dependent on Brahman. Another example is the ocean and its waves. And still another is the hub of a wheel with its spokes. The waves cannot be independent of the ocean, and so also the spokes cannot be independent of the hub. Again, there is the example of the body and its organs. The organs cannot function without the body. So behind everything in creation, every object, every person, every amoeba, everything they're all manifestations of the one Brahman, of the one consciousness. So whatever is here, he is also there. Whatever is there is the same here. He who sees the different here travels from death to death. So it is being asserted in this verse that the world is not separate from Brahman. The world is the becoming of God, Brahman. Nothing can exist without Brahman, as it is the warp and the woof of everything. To see the world as an independent entity is a fatal mistake. It means thinking of the world as real, in other words, permanent. One then becomes attached to all its allurements, and this attachment is a bondage. It makes it difficult to see anything beyond the gross sense pleasures. Life then becomes stunted. Attachment is a kind of death, a spiritual death, which is worse than physical death. The joy that spirituality offers is enduring as well as uplifting. But when you become attached to sense pleasures, you miss that joy. And even worse, you remain a captive in the cycle of birth and death. You are the storm. So whatever is here is also there. Whatever is there is the same here. He who sees the difference here travels from death to death. When you see things as this one, as the expression of this one universal consciousness, then wherever you are, whether you're meditating, whether you're working, wherever you are, you're in the consciousness of God. And so that presence is there. But when you see things as they appear to be, and you get attached to those appearances, you get attached to a particular person, or a particular car, or a particular pet, or whatever you're focusing on something, a particular form, then you don't see Brahman there. You don't see the one universal consciousness, you see this particular object, and you want that object. You want to hold on to it. And this then creates problems, because then, as they say, when you see difference here, you go from death to death, meaning that you're caught up in a world in which you're one thing, everybody else is something else, and then you like certain things, and driven by those desires, by those attachments, the soul journeys from one experience, from one life to another, you're going through everything. And so, the idea, the way to avoid that is to smear God over everything, to see everything as the one reality. Then you can love everything, you can enjoy everything, you can appreciate everything in a wonderful way, but you don't get attached to this particular individual, this particular form, or this particular form, because the forms are always changing. We love a particular person, and then maybe they move away somewhere, or they pass away, or something happens, we lose them, and now we suffer. But when your consciousness, when your attention is focused on the underlying reality of things, then you don't get disturbed by what happens in the forms. The idea is that once you have your inner joy, once you have your inner connection with God, then everywhere where you go, it becomes a joy. And you find joy in this person, you find joy in this place, you find joy in this activity, everything becomes a joy, because you're not depending on the particular object or form for your joy. You're finding the joy in the underlying one kind of spirit, and then you see it everywhere. This is, we mentioned before, people go through life searching for happiness, and they think everybody's got a different opinion about what is going to make me happy. But the idea is that happiness is something that you are, something you find inside. Once you find it inside, then all your experiences are happy. And even what we call unpleasant, difficult, problematic experiences, those also become happy. It's just a game. Almost all your games, sports, whatever, the idea is that you're trying to achieve a particular goal, and in order to reach that goal, there's obstacles. There's always something blocking the other player or something. And if you get through the obstacles, then you win the game. Now, when we were children, when we were playing games, all this was just great fun. And sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. And the obstacles, the problems, and things that were part of the game, because it was just part of the game, and we enjoyed it all. But then, as we get caught up in life, as we get more immersed into it and take it more seriously, we lose that capacity to be happy. And so then everything, all these problems and difficulties and obstacles, they now become a source of aggravation and frustration and unhappiness to us. And this is how most of us go through life struggling with all these problems and difficulties. But when you begin to find your base inside, then you find that, everything is fine. As I mentioned, we were reading, I think it was a previous meditation class, we were doing a book on everyday enlightenment. I think that fairly ordinary people will achieve some degree of enlightenment. And invariably, one thing they always said was, they suddenly realized everything's okay. Everything's fine. I have nothing to worry about. And so this, when we're in the right state of mind, the right state of consciousness, we begin to see this whole universe as a wonderful play of the mind. And we're not depending on a particular event or a particular acquisition or relation for our happiness. This, as long as you're depending on something outside yourself to make you happy, then as soon as you lose that thing, you become unhappy. Most people, they have a desire, I want this, I want to live in a big house. Maybe eventually they'll get that big house. But they may go through years of frustration and dissatisfaction because they don't have that house. And so most of their life is miserable. I read graduates from college, they go up to the career. Most people think, oh, I'm going to get a job with a good salary, I'm going to make a lot of money, and then I'm going to have a big house, a nice car, and they spend their whole life in a job they don't like, being miserable. In order, someday I'm going to have my yacht. Someday I'm going to get that. And this is kind of the American dream. Years and years ago, I read a book on time management. The first one, now not speaking about that, but one of the first ones to come out. And the basic theme of this book is that you should spend every minute of your life making money so that one day you can retire to Florida and you can have a condo and a yacht and everything. But by then, you're usually people, they get sick and die. So after all that. So like that, we're looking and saying, oh, if I can get this thing here, it's going to make me happy. And then we either don't get it, spend our whole lives being frustrated, or we get it and we go, okay, so what? It just wasn't that exciting because we didn't realize that the happiness has to come within. If you get it within, it's in all your experiences. If you don't have it within, you can have the most wonderful experiences. You can live in a penthouse and have this incredible everything that life can offer, and you won't enjoy it. You'll still be miserable. And this is true of a lot of very rich people, is that they can have every pleasure in the world, everything they want, and they're miserable. Whereas other people may have very little, and they're fully happy. And some of the happiest people in the world are the monks who don't possess hardly anything. But they found their happiness inside. So the ideal, the spiritual ideal, kind of what you could call the monastic ideal, is to find your happiness, your reality, your power, everything within, and then to share it with others. If you don't have it, you can't give it. And like that, this is the kind of the idea. As long as you're seeing difference, as long as you're attaching importance to this person who looks nice, so I like that. This person has a lousy personality, so I don't like that. As long as you're attaching difference, not seeing, oh, everything is grounded, then you're on this journey, this soul's journey from experience to experience, from life to life. It gets through a life and it's, oh, then next time I'm going to do this. So then it comes back into life again and then dies and so forth like that. It's going through constant changes. One is seeking. But what is seeking is something that's already there within its own inner nature, its own deep true self, and that's the only place that you can ever find it. So whatever is here is also there. Whatever is there is the same here. It's not that you have to reject the world or hate the world. It's that you realize, well, Brahman is here. When I'm meditating, Brahman is there, God is there. When I'm in the world, God is there. If you can develop that consciousness, that whatever I'm doing, the presence of God is here, then you're kind of in good shape. And then you'll see that you don't react as strongly to whatever goes on. Maybe good things happen, maybe bad things happen, but you've got something kind of solid that's your foundation. And then everything comes and goes. So then, verse 11, by the purified mind alone, this problem can be realized. Nothing is separate from this problem. He who thinks there's anything separate from this goes from death to death. So nothing in this world is independent of Brahman. Rather, everything exists because of Brahman. Everything arises from Brahman, rests on it, and finally merges into it. This fact, however, is not grasped by anyone having a gross mind. You have to be highly perceptive to understand it. The kind of mind you need is one sharpened and chastened by years of spiritual disciplines. When your mind has been thus purified, you realize the oneness of things. And you realize that the world is nothing but a manifestation of Brahman. The world by itself has no reality of its own. If anyone thinks that the world is a separate entity from Brahman, he is ignorant. And he suffers on that account by being born again and again. So back to the very first verse in chapter 2, when Yama first began his instructions to Nachiketa, the very first thing he said was that there are two paths present themselves before man. Path of the pleasant, prayas, and the path of the good, shreyas. He said those who follow the path of the prayas, they're led into deeper and deeper ignorance, more and more caught up in life and death and so forth, and get lost. But those who follow the path of shreyas, seeking the truth, seeking the inner reality, they come to God. They find God. So I think when the mind is totally absorbed in the outside world, then our whole consciousness, it becomes physical. And then we live a physical existence. We live a human existence. We have a little bit of happiness, a little bit of unhappiness, a little bit of success, something like that. We experience a normal human life with kind of ups and downs and things. But when we begin to search within, and when we begin to say meditate, withdraw from our grabbing over the outside world, begin to withdraw, begin to meditate and things within, gradually we begin to uncover that there's all wonderful realities there that are beyond anything I could even ever dream of, ever even hope for. When they talk about Brahman, it also sounds like a kind of abstract sort of idea, hard to really relate to, but everything's come out of that Brahman. And when you move to that Brahman, you're moving into the unfoldment of divinity, of infinite divinity, that you can't even imagine what it's like or what begins to unfold in your life. And so this is, but it's not experienced by the gross mind, which is always absorbed in whatever you're doing. Now, back at the very beginning of our class, we did meditations, practices, and we mentioned it again later. He said when you talk about meditation or spiritual practices or things like this, what you're really dealing with is a shift in consciousness. And we said how Swami Vivekananda said that we exist as three different beings simultaneously. We exist as a physical being, we exist as a mental being, and we exist as the Atman, the spirit. We're all three all the time, every moment. But what we are in practical terms, in terms of our life, in terms of our experience, that depends on where we focus our attention. So the gross mind, which is always absorbed going outside, always distracted, is not aware. Hardly aware of the mind, and it's not at all aware of the living presence of God, which is right there. The person who becomes more introspective and becomes more aware of the mental level and becomes a great scholar, a great musician, artist, things like that. The whole riches of the mind, education and knowledge, all this begins to open up for that person. And then the physical of it kind of recedes into the background. It's not so important. His real absorption is at the mental and the intellectual level. But then the person who goes even deeper and realizes that even the mind and the intellect, they're not the ultimate thing, that there's something else here which is aware of the mind, but different. Then he begins to move into the actual reality, the actual conscious experience of God. And this is what you're trying to do. So at every moment, all three of these levels are there. But what you experience, what your life is, it depends on where you attach your attention. If all of your attention is always absorbed in what's outside, in what you experience and so forth, then basically your consciousness becomes physical. And what you know, all you know, is just, what's what you experience. When you begin to go within, and you come to the level of the mind, then instead of having this very narrow existence of just eating, sleeping, just getting, going through your day, now you've got the capacity through mind to expand your understanding, your the state of your consciousness tremendously. To learn all the history and art and science and all these things, the whole vast, infinite universe is there that we can learn about. And so your state of your consciousness then grows and develops into something much beyond just pure physical existence. But then deeper than that still is the spiritual level, the Atma, which is where you come into the actual living presence of God, which is the reality of your being. And that is possible that God, that divine, infinite divine being, can become a reality that you actually experience, you actually live with, and actually get all your resources from there. So this is the idea, is that by the gross mind, which is always being absorbed in praise and the pleasant and enjoying the external world, it's not going to be aware of God. Matter for many people, they won't even believe that there could be a God. You know, it's just this is it. This is reality. And this, for most people, this is what we experience through the senses is considered the real world. Everything else is kind of a fantasy or imagination or something. But when the mind is purified gradually by spiritual practices, by meditation and things, so forth, gradually, eventually starts to become aware of this deeper, more subtle level of consciousness within. And that then begins to transform. And so the person, in other words, one person can live purely as a physical being. Another person standing right next to him can look exactly the same as him, but be an enlightened being. And this is the Gita with Krishna and Arjuna. Arjuna looked like a man, was a human being, and had a human consciousness. Krishna looked like a man, looked like a human being, but he had the divine consciousness. He was aware of the whole. But to outside appearances, there was no difference. They both looked human beings, men, hands and feet, everything like normal. But the inner consciousness was completely different. And so, no matter what a person looks like physically, their inner consciousness, it can be either really bad or it can be really good, or it can be actually one with the divine consciousness. Okay, so we will stop here. So we got up to about verse 15, 11. We got up to verse 11 in chapter 1 of book 2. So tonight, Swami Varadananda, he's got a program in India, and you're going to somewhere. Then tomorrow, Swami Varadananda and I were going to somebody's home to do a puja, and then we're going to have a parade up on the Bond Street. It's the Indian Independence Day, and they're giving us a free flow. So we got a 7-foot Quran of Swami Vivekananda, so we'll see how that goes. But that's going to be tomorrow on Bond Street. This is every year we have they have this Independence Day, Indian Independence Day parade. But this is the first year we've been involved in, so we'll see how that goes. And then Swami Varadananda will do the Sunday service on meditation, putting the yoga exercises of Patanjali. And we have our regular classes on Tuesday. We do some gospel Shama Krishna, and then Friday we do this class. We've got them starting in September. We'll have guest speakers every Sunday. We're getting into our celebrations of Swami Vivekananda's 150th birthday. Hopefully by next week we'll be sending out all the information on all this. But from now on, starting in September, particularly everything, there's all kinds of different programs going on. And the culmination will be Chicago Poly, which is going to be a big event at the Hilton Hotel in Chicago on November 9th and 10th. And we're going to have 50 swamis coming and everything. So it's going to be a very big thing. Shanti. Lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. And lead us from death to immortality. Please, please,